Hey guys, welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, the podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hi, Little Helpers. Today we've got a topic that I think we haven't talked about very much, which is eating disorders. And this is going to be, I think, mainly like an educational episode, just kind of going through the different eating disorders and what it might be like to live with somebody with one of these disorders, because it is, I think, one of the absolute hardest group of disorders on loved ones. So, Kibby, can you tell us a little bit about how Cool Mind could help?
Yeah, what Cool of Mind is up and running. Our community is thriving. It's really exciting to see everyone coming together and supporting each other, having a loved one with mental illness or addiction. So Cool of Mind is our community and support platform. It teaches you skill. We talk about all these different skills that we talk about in this podcast, like how to set healthy boundaries, how to take care of yourself, how to understand what your loved one is going through, like what are these mental health conditions. So if you have a loved one who's struggling with eating disorders or anything else, uh, just check us out. We're at kulamind.com, KULAMIND.com, or the link in the show notes.
So, eating disorders are an interesting one. I've never personally treated it. This is the group of illnesses that I would probably refer out if I got like a patient with this, just because it's so high risk, and I would really want to make sure that we've got like an expert working with them. On the other hand, though, I feel like disordered eating is so common. So I mean, I've certainly like worked with people with disordered eating, and like food in general and eating in general has been a topic. But you do have experience with eating disorders, it sounds like, right?
Not extensively. My first internship, my first job in mental health was in eating disorders, and actually, I I think I was in college. Yeah, I was in college and I interned for the New York Psychiatric Institute Eating Disorders Clinic.
Hmm.
And I think it was for a summer. I can't remember. I was so like young and it was intense. It was an inpatient unit. So it was like the most severe eating disorders you could possibly get. I mean, I didn't learn a lot about like different psychotherapies that can help them, but I saw what that was like and was my first, taste of mental health, and it was shocking. I don't think I was. In fact, after I interned, I thought, oh, I don't know if I could be a clinician. I don't know if I'm strong enough.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it took me a while to come back from it. But I was like, wow, this is a really, really severe illness, and I think that in popular culture or whatever, like popular culture, I'm so old. But when people talk about it, it's almost kind of like a joke, like people are anorexic or whatever, like it's eating disorders and body image issues are so common that people don't realize how serious eating disorders are. I'm also shocked that we haven't talked about it because we talk so much about like your thoughts about weight that I'm like, oh, we've talked about it tons, but I guess we haven't.
We were talking about body image, and we had an episode on anorexia way, or early on in
Yeah.
our podcast. But I mean, I think the reason we haven't is because it's not our area of expertise. And yet we wanted to do an episode on it, at least kind of a primer discussing the different disorders so that people could be aware of the differences and, maybe perk up their ears a little bit if they notice some of this behavior in their loved ones. Because we don't want to keep neglecting it. At the same time, it's maybe something that we'll invite guests on to talk about in the future. Um, but I don't know. Should we start with discussing just disordered eating generally, or should
Mhm.
we? Okay.
No, let's go through the different disorders and kind of break them down because knowing what the different disorders are kind of is kind of confusing unless you have the training that we have. So,
Yeah. So I think, the first stop is usually anorexia. This is the one that most people hear about. I remember like growing up in the aughts, and one of the most dangerous aspects, I think, of both anorexia and bulimia is that there can be a lot of community around it.
mm,
There are like Reddit groups, I think, social media groups that talk about Anna and Mia, meaning like anorexia and bulimia, and they'll be talked about as if they are your friends. And there'll be like a lot of tips and that kind of thing. And so it can be really, really dangerous to lose people to this disorder because they can find a lot of like encouragement for it, like dogging of it online. And I remember being in high school and it was a little bit similar in that case. It was kind of glorified or romanticized to at least flirt with anorexia. Do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, and so for people who don't know the actual definition of anorexia, it's extreme food restriction, and paired with an intense fear of gaining weight. So usually people with anorexia have low body weight, like they're really underweight, but no matter how small they get, they could still see themselves as overweight. So it kind of has like some delusional pieces to it where I mean, I remember in the clinic, girls were, they're mostly girls. Their bones were sticking out, and they were still saying like, "I'm just huge. I'm so fat." So there is some sort of like distorted, perception of themselves. I do remember I went to an all-girls school, and there was a period of time, especially when we were going from I think it was like in eighth grade, the kind of the age where you start to like get interested in boys and start to date more. Some people start to have sex, right? It started to become like we're like sexual beings. There was like rampant, I don't know if it was a level of eating disorders, but diets, right?
Hmm.
And it was really praised, like we really praised each other when we would only eat. I mean, even diets can hide when someone has an eating disorder, right? Like Atkins diet was really popular back in my day, which meant that you only ate like meat essentially. So people would just have like one slice of turkey and like two celery sticks, and
Hmm.
we'd praise each other. We'd be like, "Oh my God, it's so great!" And we lose so much weight so quickly. And yeah, it was something that it probably would have taken like a really, really extreme case for us to get worried that someone had an eating disorder, but otherwise it was like, oh, they're doing what we're all doing. So yeah, it was like this really encouraged thing. Yeah, anorexia usually is diagnosed with like rules around eating and food restriction, like eating really few calories. Like when we actually diagnose, when we do the assessments, we ask, like talk me through a typical day of eating, and if it's a really low number of calories, that's a sign. If they're low weight, but also yes, if they're really low weight and but exercise, so they might have like normal amount of eating, but they're exercising to the point where they're losing weight and not getting enough nutrients. That's another sign of anorexia.
And it usually has, I mean, what I was taught was that it has a different kind of personality profile than the other eating
Yeah.
disorders. Highly perfectionistic, highly kind of controlled. These people really like control. And anything else that you know of?
Yeah, I mean, all of the eating disorders, especially anorexia, have a lot of comorbidities with anxiety, OCD, and personality disorder. So there's a lot of perfectionistic, right, in anorexia. And bulimia that we'll talk about in a minute is a lot more impulsivity.
Hmm.
So anorexia is often people with anorexia will come from families that are really highly, you know, into perfection, into achievement, right? This kind of like I can't mess up. So it's just like this need for control that is exerted on the body, right?
Yeah, and that's a very different mechanism than some of these other eating disorders. It's so interesting because I mean, anorexia and bulimia can look similar. Like if you're, doing this sort of extreme exercise behavior, trying to, trying to limit. I think we think of these as like two disorders with the same aim, but that's not necessarily true. And it can be two like different personality sort of subtypes that are
Yeah.
either one. Anorexia is also the most dangerous. It's generally thought of.
Yeah.
Because I mean, for diagnosis of anorexia, you need that low weight, which is actually not required for the other disorders.
Yeah. It is the most, if not one of the most deadly disorders that we have in mental
Period.
health. So
Yeah.
yeah, anorexia kills a lot of people,
Yeah.
right? So it's really serious. It you are undernourishing yourself. So a lot of people with severe anorexia end up dying. And they
Yeah.
might die of different things. Like they might have issues with their electrolyte balance, right? If you don't eat a lot, your electrolytes are kind of all messed up. And some of them might have like heart issues, heart failure, heart attacks. Um, so it's really deadly. And beyond deadly, when you don't eat, it messes up a lot of other stuff, right? Obviously. But when you don't eat, eventually the hunger cues kind of shut off, so they might not feel hungry. They might even have like this surge of like reward, like dopamine, like runner's high kind of feeling when they don't eat, when they restrict. So it's like reinforcing in a really scary way. Um And when you don't eat, you'd also cognitively get messed up, right? If you're super hungry and starved,
Mhm.
everything else is messed up, including like thinking and decision making. So they become kind of like addicts where it's like it hijacks the brain. And in fact, if people are so undernourished, they can't actually do therapy, right?
Mhm.
Because their brains are just like, I can't eat. I don't know what they're talking about. I can't possibly. Like, you can't think about your values or your thoughts or changing your perception if like you're starving, right?
Mhm.
So actually, people with anorexia, like the severe cases, have to eat first before they could actually do psychotherapy. And it was really hard to sit with in the inpatient unit for eating disorders. A lot of patients with anorexia had to be force fed because they were so close to death, so health compromised that sometimes they would, oh gosh, I mean, they would have to sometimes be tied down and given like milk or food because I mean, it sounds barbaric, but they were like
Mhm.
starving themselves to death, right? So, their safety becomes the highest priority. So they had to be force fed because, and sometimes even like restricted physically, because some of them would, once they got the food, they would freak out and like do a bunch of sit-ups in their cells, like in their beds, or they'd like do running in place. They'd be constantly trying to work out. So you would have to like restrain them from doing that and feeding them. So it just seems like opposite of survival mechanisms, right? Like it just seems like someone who's just like their brains are have gone haywire, but it really is unbelievable and it's so sad.
It's such an interesting one because I think there's something intuitive about it in the beginning, which is diet culture, right? Like so many of us are trying to starve ourselves a little. Losing weight, even when we're already thin, can is very desirable. And then, but then you see these people, and it's like, how in the world could you still want to lose weight more? Like how you are on the verge of death, you are starving yourselves. How is it still happening? But we know that they have a delusional view of their own body types. So we know that if they were to draw themselves, for instance, they would draw themselves with a much different body type than they have in reality, with much more weight on it. So they're not seeing themselves realistically. But it's incredible that even on the verge of actual starvation, there's still this belief that there has to be more weight loss. And I wonder if at that point it is even about weight, or if this
Yeah,
just, yeah.
I don't know. I think it's about weight and control, right?
Hmm.
A lot of patients with anorexia have said that they were felt out of control in other parts of their lives, like they've been through abuse or there's other, they lived with, an abusive family or something, and this was something that they were able to control. Usually they're very smart, they're good at school, they're thin, because of all this, they're popular, they're getting so much reinforcement for being skinny. Um, and I think also our cultural standards for what is acceptably skinny is also off. So they might be starving and people are still praising them.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's just like it's such a slippery slope.
It is interesting.
Ugh.
I mean, it is the one disorder that you get really like positive reinforcement for a very long time. Like the whole kind of up ramp for this or on ramp for this disorder is like losing weight and people admiring you, admiring your discipline, admiring the exact mechanism. that is killing you.
Yeah.
And then by the time maybe that admiration stops, it's been so kind of embedded in you that this is a good thing to be doing.
I read a fascinating article a long time ago, because it's so like counterintuitive that humans have to survive by eating. So it's so counterintuitive that this mechanism would kick in and they would just keep starving themselves till they die. Um, this article, I have to find it, and if I can, I'll link it to the show notes. But one theory is that um, there might be an evolutionary mechanism happening where, especially in groups that are nomadic, uh, there might be some, because we know there's some genetic propensity for getting eating disorders. So there might be something like there's certain nomadic cultures, or even, you know, just in humanity, where there might be cases where you need to pick up your tribe and go somewhere else to get food, right? You might
Mm.
be there might be some like natural disaster and not enough food, so you have to like travel far distances in order to like find new sustenance. And it makes sense for your hunger cues and your body to kind of go into this different mode of like, I'm running. I'm not eating. I'm just gonna I'm in nomadic like movement. I don't even know the word, but you know what I mean. Like, we're not eating, we're running and we're going.
Mm.
And so they think that there might be some evolutionary ties to that state where when people stop eating, it kicks in like, oh, we're in danger. We have to survive by not eating. So let's not eat. So
Mm.
that might be, I mean, it's theoretical, but I thought that was
Yeah.
interesting because I was like, why would people do this to themselves?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not like anybody gets praised for becoming depressed or becoming anxious, or becoming BPD or becoming traumatized. Like, there's no positive reinforcement there. But this, you've got both like a lot of external positive and social reinforcement and this kind of biological um, system that I suppose is reinforcing it as well. So that's super
Yeah.
interesting. And you're probably going to see it. I think that we know that this is more prevalent in white cultures, probably Asian as well. It's less prevalent in cultures that are more accepting of different body types, of curvier body types. So it does seem that there is like a social and cultural aspect of this. When the culture like amplifies thinness, then we're more at risk of this. And then adolescence is
Yeah.
a particularly dangerous time, both because that is when our bodies change and put on weight rapidly, and that can really freak girls out, and because it is a time when your life is really out of your control, just as you are trying to exercise your autonomy.
Hmm. Yeah. And sometimes not eating has that like, rewarding effect. So it can be emotion regulation, right? It not only rewards itself, but it could, just it's like a self-harm kind of thing where it distracts from other sensations or emotions that might be intense. And
Yeah.
and you're right, actually, there is research showing that's um westernized or developed countries are more likely to have eating disorders. I know now I'm like digging into all of our grad school research and like remembering all the different factoids that we learned, that there's something crazy about when there's a link to eating disorder, rates of eating disorders rising when TV and other kinds of media are introduced into a culture.
Mm.
Like when a culture gets access to like American TV shows or Western standards of beauty, then eating disorders goes up. So there is that environmental component.
One thing I've been noticing with my own like body image is I've been going to a lot of like saunas recently, and I've been looking around and I'm like, most people don't have beautiful bodies. Like most people are have average looking bodies or like even wonky or disproportionate, right? Like just really different kinds of bodies. And I think it's the fact that I follow all of my bachelor friends that has me so crazy.
Not
It's
even that. I mean, like, your bachelor friends, I mean, the ones that I've met in person, it's crazy. They are like such naturally beautiful. I mean, they're just like genetic. gods. Like it's just like, are you serious? Like this is you on a bad day? But not only that, but then we have all social media where there's like filters, and then
Hmm.
there's everyone doing, body modifications of diet and like fillers and all that. So everyone's like conforming to a very specific look.
Yeah.
Let's not even talk about GLP-1s, where now people are dropping weight like crazy. So yeah, I mean, all of this like social comparisons can feed into body image issues.
Yeah. Um, I also think it's an interesting, like if you are an adolescent and you bring this into your family dynamic, I mean, you have a toddler, and I imagine food and eating is already sometimes um, a battle. Maybe not
Hmm.
with Jackson, I don't know, but with a lot of families with toddlers, right? Like eating in the family, eating with like
Hmm.
kids eating behavior can really kind of like hijack the family dynamic. And I would think that bringing this back in as an adolescence would bring in a lot of um, attention and um, yeah, I mean, it would just, if you feel out of control, if you feel like you are being controlled by others, then this is a way to flip that script a little bit.
Hmm.
I mean, it makes
Yeah,
me
and
very scared.
I also do remember that the my friends back in the all-girls school that had eating disorders, like they had pressures from their families, like they were ballet dancers
Mm,
or eventually became actresses or just in the public light, and it's just so much more accepted in, let's say, ballet dance school to like comment on kids' weight,
mm,
especially with all those different changes. And so, yeah, that's gonna create that kind of pressure and normalize being super underweight. I also did want to mention that one, if you're not sure if your loved one has like a friend or a sibling has eating disorder. I don't know why I said like friend or sibling. Like those are two categories. I was just if anyone you know has eating disorders. One thing that's like it's a tell is not only are they skinny, but if they are having different rules about food, like it may not. I think I watched the show Skins. I think it's on Netflix. It was an old British show about teenagers, and the one character uh, had like it was just like a really good example of someone with like, severe anorexia. Um, she would have all these different rules, like you chop up certain foods and push them to the side. Like they might have different ways to um,
like
they
disguise
like
the
have
bulk.
rules to like yeah to like cut down on the food like oh I'm just like I could eat half of this or I'm gonna put this on the side like they're controlling their food in different ways like that
Hmm.
um or they have like extreme like I'm a vegan right like you're like oh okay but then they are using rules and justification like I can't have this kind or that kind and so diets that are structured somehow become like all these very restrictive rules, or
Yeah.
they'll just do things to disguise that they're not eating. So they will like have tricks of like putting things in their mouth and spitting it out somewhere, or cutting up food to look like they're eating, but
Hmm.
and then having like a few bites in different places. But um, yeah, so it's almost kind of like an addiction where they are able to hide in plain sight that they look like they're doing normal things, but they're actually like eating, super low calories. So
Yeah. Oh, this is honestly, it's one of my worst fears as a mom, as a future mom.
yeah.
I'm absolutely terrified if my daughter or son, but much more likely to be a girl, brought this home. So we can talk about bulimia.
Hmm.
So bulimia,
Yeah.
core
Um,
the core difference I would say there's two. A is that there's not necessarily any weight loss. Um, but B, like you wouldn't be diagnosed with bulimia if you're underweight. Like I think a lot of people think of
I
anorexia
think
and bulimia as like alternative pathways for starvation, but it's not. Anorexia involves starvation. Bulimia does not actually involve weight loss necessarily.
Yeah, bulimia. I'm trying to remember actually. There's like a diagnostic criteria. If you're seeing, for example, like intense exercise, the difference is if you're underweight, you might be diagnosed with anorexia, but if you
Mhm.
are average or overweight, you are diagnosed with bulimia.
Right,
So it can come with those compensatory behaviors to avoid weight gain, like the stereotypical throwing up, laxatives, fasting, excessive exercise, but they might not actually be underweight.
right. And the reason that so the second major differentiator is the compensatory behaviors are compensating for binge eating. You're not seeing
Hmm.
that binge eating in anorexia. That's starvation. So you
Yep.
might see purging, intense exercise and everything, but that's in combination with low eating. The compensatory behaviors in bulimia are because you've just binged.
Yeah.
And so the binge is actually the first um, kind of response to like an emotional trigger.
Hmm. Yeah, and to be clear, I think people use binging very commonly. So, whenever we do these assessments with the skid interview, you go, "Do you eat a lot in a 2 hour period?" And that's like the first question, and everyone goes, "Yeah." You're like, "Give me an example." Like, "Oh, last night I ate a whole bag of chips watching a
Hmm.
movie." It's like, yeah, that's a lot, but that's not binge eating. Binge eating looks like just like inhaling, like a lot of food in a short amount of time. And it has this feeling of loss and control, kind
Yeah.
of like some people have described it as like they kind of like dissociate or go numb or go on automatic, like they're just eating like cartons and carts of ice cream, and then yeah, it kind of feels like a narcotic. It kind of feels like they just like lose themselves in this.
Hmm.
And usually that is a way of dealing with like regulating like pain or as a distraction, right? But it's like this a lot. I mean, I will say I didn't know what binge eating really was until in college. I saw a friend having a binge. She had a really rough night where she felt rejected by someone she was interested in, and she came home with two um, huge slices of pizza. We have this thing called Coronets Pizza near Columbia, where it was like literally a foot long
Hmm.
slices. She had two of those, ate that, and then had two. My Alex, my now husband, was eating White Castle burgers, those disgusting, like little, like gray looking burgers, like that came in a box. So they were eating them, and he was eating a lot of it, but she grabbed and like ate several. So after the 2 foot long slices, she ate like three or four, and then she grabbed a bunch of candy from my candy bag and ate like 10 Starburst. And then she went and I'll never forget this. She took a couple cans of tuna fish and ate them raw, like with no
Oh my
like
God.
mayonnaise or mix. Like she just like ate them straight. And I think she finished off with like some canned soup she really liked. And I remember sitting there
Hmm.
watching her because I remember it was like in the course of a movie, um, and just watching her just eat this. And she did kind of look like she was not there. Like she wasn't talking. She was just like looking ahead and eating like robotically almost, as if she was like sleepwalking. And the
Yeah.
amount of food, I was like, I don't know how physically you could handle, like once you get sick from that. But that's when I was like, oh, that's what a binge looks like, this total
Hmm.
loss of control. So, um, yeah, that was poor girl. She's better now. She has a great life.
No.
But
Good. Was she then a purger? I mean, or was she this, was this?
not that I know of. Not that I
Okay.
know of. So you can she might have had binge eating disorder, which is all of that without the compensatory feelings. And but bulimia, I remember in the eating disorders unit, some of the bulimia, I just I mean, imagine that this is my first job in mental health, and I was just like, "Yay, I'm gonna be a psychologist, maybe." And there were cases where um, the binging and purging had its own rituals to it. Like, oof, I mean, trigger warning if anyone's grossed out by this kind of stuff, like body stuff. In fact, this whole episode was mostly tough on you, but there was people who had to weigh their vomit, like to make
Mm.
sure. And if it was like too little, then they would exercise. They would sometimes would like keep it and store it in their closet, and the mom would discover it. Um, or just like really intense, like laxative fasting or diet stuff after, like they'd binge for a couple days and then they'd like starve themselves for several days after, right? Or they would exercise for hours. And I mean, like on the treadmill for 2 hours, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, yeah, it became kind of this like calculation obsession of like, I lost control, but then I had to get the control back, you know. And it's a lot more of like this impulsive drug seeking behavior than anorexia looked. Anorexia was like, I control everything, and this is like, I'm out of control and then I have to make up for it. I'm out of control, right? So
Yeah. It's just painful to think about how much shame is going to go with bulimia too. I mean, the idea of hiding your vomit or hiding your excrement, right? Like, these people are deeply ashamed of that, and they're living like in extreme secrecy because that is something that's going to get you rejected very, very quickly. And I mean, people are going to be shocked, right? People are going to be horrified by that. But it's it's like it's compulsive.
mhm,
I don't
mhm.
know. My heart just kind of breaks for people who are living that existence. Um,
Yeah, that's a tough one. At least they're less at risk of dying
mhm.
than anorexia because they're not undernourished, but they have a lot of health issues themselves. I mean, they, as you can imagine, like electrolyte balance of vomiting all the time is totally off. So I think that people could actually have like other health issues based on that. And then like just like,
A lot of
oof,
corrosive
I mean,
effects on the throat and teeth.
yeah, it's really hard on the throat and the teeth. So you could tell someone has bulimia, but if they have to like this kind of like, you know, kind of rotting teeth or this moon face, people call it.
Mm.
So because especially because of the pressure and everything. Sorry if this is gross, but like they'll have like a puffy face. So that's a sign of bulimia as well.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know.
I believe Britt Nielsen, who was on The Bachelor, opened up about her struggles with, I think it was bulimia. And she's given beautiful accounts of what this is like. So if anybody kind of wants like a firsthand account from Bachelor Nation, I remember watching her videos and really respecting her for talking about it because it was no holds bars. I mean, she really talked about what it was like for her to go into this emotional place and and the shame afterwards. Um, I was gonna say, I think it's also counterproductive. I think scientifically our bodies absorb the nutrients very, very quickly, and so the
Mhm.
vomit actually doesn't really compensate very much for it,
Yeah.
but also it probably alleviates like the pressure that builds inside the body when you eat that much, and that might be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, bulimia, of course, is associated with that body image concern, right? But it seems to have, as you were saying, different mechanisms of more about like the out of control and the trying to get control back. So it's kind of like this emotion regulation
Hmm.
kind of issue about like feeling totally dysregulated and then trying to get regulation back.
Yeah. Um, and of course, binge eating disorder. There's no compensatory behavior necessarily, but these binges are happening usually like in private. There's a lot of shame about it, a lot of guilt about it, and again, that kind of dissociative state. Um, and this, I think, like, there's a lot of shame also of like this creates. if this exists in like overweight or in obese people who then can have like shame about eating in front of people in general because of the judgment they feel like they'll receive for eating too much or eating the wrong things. So, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
God, it's like anywhere you look within this, it's so painful.
Yeah, yeah. Binge eating disorder apparently is the most common eating
Mhm.
disorder. Um, it's not usually, usually people are overweight or average weight, but yeah, it's like binging and then having like the huge discomfort and distress after. I have probably that girl from college had it, to be honest. Because I didn't think I saw her. I mean, I don't know about her purging behaviors, but um,
Yeah,
oh, it's so sad. Yeah, and that of course, like as you imagine with problems with eating a lot, you're high risk for diabetes and heart disease and other hypertension problems. So
yeah.
it was also very dangerous.
Okay, so if we have a loved one struggling with,
Wait. There's one more to
oh,
cover. I mean, there's body dysmorphia, which we'll cover in another episode because I think you have it. And we talked about this where I'm like, uh-oh, I think you have a disorder, Jacqueline. I think we should talk about it
I do not think I have a dysmorphia
publicly.
disorder. Maybe BB light or something, but we can,
Yeah. This
yeah.
this episode is my way to be like, I think you have some of this.
I
Anyway,
definitely, yeah.
serious loved
Uh,
ones. Um, No, well, one more to remember. I think this is getting a little bit more attention because sensory processing disorders are getting more attention, but avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID, is when someone um, limits or controls what they eat because they're afraid of other negative consequences like choking or throwing up. Like they're like, oh, there's certain foods I don't eat because I'm terrified of throwing up, or they don't like the texture. Of course, there's levels of that that's normal, but it's especially if it's like they really restrict their food, right? They only have certain textures. Um,
but it's not
so
about weight. It's about,
it's not, yeah.
yeah, it's just an intolerance. Yeah. But I mean, I like if you are a loved one of somebody with one of these disorders, I really feel for you. I mean, I feel for anybody with the disorder as well, but to watch someone you love waste away or not be able to control what they're putting in their body, and not from like binge eating disorder is not somebody loving to eat. That this is not an enjoyable experience. It is a distress tolerant. It's a distress management system that they hate and that makes them feel intensely negative about themselves and it feels out of control. It's not like I'm gonna, enjoy my time eating this feast. So, I mean, it's watching somebody engage in legitimately dangerous behavior and feel like they can't stop. And I do think your kind of journey with it as a loved one differs depending on the eating disorder, but do you have kind of initial tips?
I mean, the tips are, I mean, just knowing, first of all, and the major tip is knowing these different eating disorders so you can pick it out. Because some people might already know, oh, this is what, if someone throws up, that's a sign of eating disorder, and not realizing that their friends or their families like dieting behavior could be eating disorders. But it's really tough for families and loved ones because it's kind of like I think the issues kind of sound similar to addiction or, anything else like that, where um, there's a lot of trust problems. There's a lot of like uh, fights around it, right? Like trying to get your kid to eat or trying to, get someone to eat more or be healthier, and they hide how much they don't eat, right? They like hide their purging behaviors or um yeah, you could get into a battle of like control over the person's eating. You're like monitoring their eating, and so it could be really stressful because it's like, you know, eating is such a social bonding experience. Like dinner tables, family dinners can suddenly become like, you know, a battleground, right? And then on the other side, there might be some ways you might be accommodating or even enabling some of those behaviors, like allowing that loved one to like not eat as much or make sure you only have certain foods or
Yeah.
um, be okay with their, intense purging. But I mean, tips number one, we all know education, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And also education about therapy. I mean, I think a lot of people think, "Oh, my daughter has anorexia. I need to get her a therapist." But I would maybe think that it's actually more appropriate to at least additionally have family therapy
mhm.
because this is
Yeah.
often
I mean,
family's
if you,
problem. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, to that point, I should link the our episode with Nandini talking about family therapy for especially like teens and kids with eating disorders, because that really does highlight that, this is the case with all the mental disorders we're talking about, but especially with this, because food and eating are so, I don't know, relational, that working on the system needs to happen, right? Like making sure that you're not accidentally reinforcing, some of the disordered eating, like, for example, like try not to make comments about their weight, right? Like, I mean, even just saying like, "Oh, you're looking good now," or well, you look terrible. You look so skinny, right? Like all these different comments that you could say it to one person and it might hurt their feelings or whatever and might not have such an effect. But someone with eating disorder, it'll kind of send them into a spiral, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, you look skinny, and it could be meant as a compliment, but they go, oh, but oh, someone's noticing my body. Oh, I'm starting to think about how I'm actually fat, and it could really, add to themselves. So like, try not to talk about like weight, or eating or dieting like that.
I mean, or it could
Um,
accidentally reinforce them. If you say,
yeah,
you look terrifying, you look like you're starving yourselves, it could be seen as great, I'm finally succeeding. I mean, we don't know, but
right.
it's right. Bringing attention to the way that the body looks is counterproductive. But also, I think like if you're struggling with anorexia and bulimia in a different way, I mean, especially like as an adolescent, it's likely that there are dynamics within the home about
Hmm.
control, like power and control.
Hmm.
And so understanding those and
Hmm.
helping your child have power or control in different healthy ways could be an easier ticket there than being like, go work on your problems alone. Um,
Yeah, I imagine that that must be so hard if you like see your kid essentially starving themselves and not, try to get more control over them, right? Just be like, no, you've got to eat, right? And that actually will backfire because they're going to try to push for more control.
yeah,
So yeah, like talking about power dynamics and control and agency and trust and building trust slowly with that.
yeah.
Um, an example of what not to do. I don't know if you heard about Tessa. Have you heard about Tessa?
No,
Oh, okay.
person or thing.
Tessa was an AI chatbot that the National Eating Disorders Association added to its hotline.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also an example of how AI can, kind
Oh
of go
God.
rogue if you're not careful with it. But it was supposed to, deal with the all the people calling in asking for help with eating disorders. And if you don't if you don't like monitor and have oversight over the chatbot, this is what happened. So it started to recommend like weight loss and calorie counting and like measuring body fat. Like it started to give diet tips to the people calling in to the hotline.
Oh, Lord.
Um, yeah. And so like of course the chatbot's just gonna do whatever it asks. So they were probably just like it was probably just answering the questions of like how to lose weight, but you don't do that on a hotline for for eating disorders. So it was quickly taken off. But don't do that. Like don't, you know, en masse give eating to people with eating disorders diet tips, but don't do that to your loved ones too. If you see someone who's struggling with eating disorders, try not to step in with your advice, right? Because all of this kind of eating and body image, advice that we have are coming from not having a disorder, right? So if I
Mhm.
say, "Oh, you look great, just cut out sugar," or wow, but you look so, just the diet tips that you might have that might work for you, or even like compliments or reassurances might land differently for someone with eating disorder. So,
Yeah.
don't do that.
You're also probably not a nutritionist, so it's it's probably not necessary for somebody who's like really, really struggling with this kind of thing. And if you are a nutritionist, also don't go that that route. But I just think that the like maybe the well-meaning advice can be like, oh no, if you want to lose weight, like I can tell you how to do it in a healthy way. But it's like, no, we actually want to take the focus away from weight loss and
Hmm.
from trying to control food.
Hmm.
Um, Binge eating and bulimia come with massive amounts of shame. I think, if you are aware of somebody struggling with this, trying to be as validating as possible, trying to be as de-shaming as possible, is helpful.
Like, I think keeping in mind all the things that we said about this, where it's like, it's very dangerous to your health, right? People with eating disorders might think differently about food and their body image and everything like that. And it hijacks your brain. So it's a disease, right? So don't blame them or just assume, like, what's the problem? Just eat, right? Like, just eat a little bit. You look great, right? So don't treat it like this is something to make fun of them for, or that they're have a moral failing or they don't have a problem. Like, take this as a serious health issue
Mhm.
and don't blame them or get mad at them or make fun of them, right?
Yeah.
Like, teasing can really be awful,
Yeah.
right?
And I think also like looking out for, if you are the mom or sister or whatever the case may be, but like really look out for your other relationships. I've worked with a couple who their kid didn't have any eating disorder per se, but another like really, really rough um, you know, disorder, and it tore the marriage apart because they're so freaked out all the time that this is their fault. And when you feel like you're dealing with something life or death in your kid, if you're watching your kid starve themselves, then everything you do feels like it has life or death kind of consequences. And so the probability that you and your spouse in particular will start panicking over the individual decisions that you make, it just carries a really high risk, right? Like it makes it hard to like this. I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say there's a couple with a kid who is not eating at the dinner table, and the dad freaks out and says, you are not leaving this dinner table until you have 5 bites of food, right? And then the mom is like, oh my God, you're pushing her. You're gonna make eating an even more stressful experience. And she's like, it's okay, honey, it's okay, you don't have to eat. But then he's like, you're letting her starve, right? Like, I'd rather force feed her than not. And then now they're at odds. And then that raises the tension in the home, which then raises the tension for the daughter. And then
Mhm.
this gets even worse.
Mhm.
So really kind of like like getting couples counseling can be helpful for this. Really working on keeping your union strong and then saying like, we're going to go in with the same intentions here, and we're going to understand that each of us can't be perfect all the time, and we're going to freak out. And this is coming from a place of being really scared because we love somebody who's destroying themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And having the balance between those two sides, right? Like, you hear the polarizing, I just heard that in what you're saying. One is like, they've got to eat and we got to make them eat. And the other one's like, no, 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 we don't want to upset them. Um, so you could see even in your example how eating disorders can hijack like the whole family dynamic, right? Like, then what do you do at dinners?
Yeah.
Do you all just like not eat together just so because it's so triggering to eat in front of this one kid, or do you force them to eat? Like, what do you do? And so having a balance and having being on the same page, like with a plan of how to do that, and not having all these different rules, but just being on the same page by having some boundaries, but also giving them some agency. Like, okay, we're going to have family dinners. We are going to eat meat or whatever, fatty foods might but otherwise triggering.
Mm.
You're welcome to join as long as, even if you just sit with us, right? So just, I mean, making sure that it doesn't get to, we don't like that word enabling, but either accommodating those the loved one with an eating disorder. Don't accommodate too much and shape your whole life and family life around protecting their feelings around it. Or so even maintaining some level of normalcy and healthy boundaries is really important.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you can, include healthy aspects of your meal, include fruits and veggies, but not say tonight we're having celery for dinner. Not necessarily turn the entire family vegan suddenly, but say like, look, you've got your safe foods on the plate, they're nutritious. This is what's for dinner, and trying not to get into a power struggle with them, I guess. But I mean, this is one I would not wait to get help with.
Yeah.
So finding a really qualified eating disorders therapist, if that is in your area, finding somebody that you can talk to about this, not isolating, right? Like hopefully finding validating friends who aren't blaming you, the parents or the siblings or whoever it is, then, for this family dynamic. And like I actually have a friend who grew up in a family where his sister had this eating disorder, and he felt very kind of passed over. His parents were just kind of like, well, he's
Mhm.
fine. We've got this crisis on our hands. So then he grew up kind of neglected. So, I mean, there's just there's so much here to talk about. And that's why family therapy can be so important, right? Because it's not actually just about the person with the eating disorder. That little boy is part of the family too, and he's kind of wondering, what about me? And the parents
Mhm.
are freaking out, and their marriage is falling apart. And I mean, there's all of these different dynamics that
Mhm.
need to be brought in.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's like the extreme examples can take over the whole family dynamic, but also I also think that eating disorders, unless people are aware of it, it can be sneaky and go and fly under the radar because there might be other issues, especially with if you're dealing with someone with bulimia who has impulsive behaviors in general, right? They're also self-harming, or they're also, driving drunk, or they have another addiction or something like that, then that might get more attention. But I think when you have a loved one who is like dealing with a lot of mental health issues, include, and you're talking to their therapist, or you're kind of like noting the different things that are going on, note like their eating behaviors and note their, sleeping, for example. But because if it might be something that you don't notice right away, like, oh, they're eating less or they're
Mm.
working out after eating a lot, right? Like that could seem almost like in the realm of normal. They have this crazy diet that they're following and they're dropping a ton of weight, and that's so great because they look so good, right? Like it is easy to kind of like have these disorders be like totally masks, but they are part of the problem. And they take a lot of patience and a lot of like specialized therapy to treat, because it's not just like, oh, they start to eat normally and all the problems are gone.
Yeah.
Like they might be eating and they might actually be like properly nourished, which is great, but there might be all those other mechanisms involved that still need help, right? Like, you know, question of control, question of distress tolerance, question of like their self-esteem, right? Their impulsivity, right? It's it's all these other things that could be like, okay, just because the eating is fixed doesn't mean everything else is fixed.
Right. Exactly.
I feel like we might be scaring people. Like, this is a
I mean,
big deal,
it
super
is a big
deadly,
deal.
super dangerous.
It is super
You
deadly
might
and
not
super.
see it. I mean, yeah, I think
I mean, I
that's,
don't think we need to freak out
yeah, it's
over every
legit.
pound of weight loss, but especially in like early 20s, adolescence, I'd be worried, if I saw eating behavior drastically change in my kid, and fostering an environment of like, we eat healthy, but we eat to fuel our body, not to like, sculpt our body into perfection, which was what I learned. Um, is important.
Yeah,
And
you tell me, what are the tips for loved ones, friends, podcast co-hosts of someone? You don't have eating. I'm kidding. I just said like I told we just said not to make a joke out of it. Look at me, publicly
well, it's
shaming you
not.
for this, but
Well, what's tough is that it's a lot of people have behaviors along this line, you know? Like, it's not like I can really go through my week not thinking about what I eat every time I have a meal. I mean, I calorie count. I'm like, if I have simple carbs, you know, then I'm starting to freak out a little bit. Like, how am I going to get, you know, how am I going to reverse this situation? If I have takeout, I'm constantly thinking about like what oils did they use?
Really?
Yeah,
I shouldn't be surprised. I mean,
no, you shouldn't.
the thing that I get usually is you thinking that you don't look good in like pictures or videos, and I'm like, you look great, as always. And then you're like, look at this flaw, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but okay. But I didn't realize that like every time you eat, do you do something in response to that? Like, do you actually like restrict yourself or do you have
Sometimes,
compensatory behaviors, purging
sometimes.
behaviors?
I mean, I don't purge. No, that that's a no. But I'll go through periods where I'll restrict what I eat a lot. I just can't. I actually don't have the. I don't want to use a positive word here, like self-discipline, because I don't want to like reward the idea of restriction. But I usually can't keep it going for more than a couple weeks.
Yeah, oof, that's tough. I remember when I went, when my friends and I all got, so eighth grade, started to get interested in boys, started to become sexual beings. I did go on that Atkins diet. I did diet intensely for a couple. I was working out a lot. I probably had an
Mm,
eating disorder if I were to think about it, but um, I wasn't like severely underweight. But I remember always thinking about it, always thinking about food. What I was eating, it was right. We were writing things down. We were calculating. There was no like enjoying the food. It
right.
was all like an achievement. It was all like the same thing as like doing homework. And I just remember the immense like reinforcement and the power that you get from it. Like you drop weight and suddenly people are nice to you. They're paying attention to you. They're praising you. Like they're talking about you as though you are um like better than them or somehow like have other skills. Like they're like, oh gosh, I wish I could eat as little as you are. I wish I could be so disciplined as you. While I was like eating like one turkey slice as for lunch. It's like you really get a lot of social reinforcement. I always remember that, and I always remember being kind of scared of that. Whenever I think about like cutting back or dieting or getting healthier now, I always remember and get scared of like the massive change in how people treated you, but also like how consuming it can get.
It's a lot to think about. I mean, it's tough, you know, because when I think about the things I do, you know, like I'll try to eat less than $500 for lunch so that I can eat 1,000 calories for dinner and then still be at like a calorie deficit. But it's kind of like then you go online and everyone's like, here's how to eat 1,500 calories, or like here's how to eat 400 grams of protein so that, you know, you will lose weight immediately. Like it just and you do have to think about what you eat to an extent, you know? Like I'm not going to sit around eating 4,000 calories of Pringles. Like, you know, I'm trying to think about fiber so it's not like we're not supposed to think about what we eat at all, but suddenly there's this sort of magical line where we have crossed into like disordered eating territory, and it's very confusing because it's like, well, how much thinking about what you eat is too much thinking about what you eat?
Mhm.
Intuitive eating, like what is that? Because some people who have grown up on ultra processed food, for them, intuitive eating means ultra processed food. Like I just I don't know what the right answer is for a lot of this stuff.
I mean, when in doubt, seek help.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest tip. If you're not sure, if you're like, you notice
And
that your loved one is kind of going nuts,
Tessa's got
you
some great
know?
diet advice I hear. So
Yeah. Great dieting tips.
yeah.
Um, but yeah.
Well, on that depressing note, you know, I mean these are a really scary group of disorders. Like I don't think that there is necessarily too much fear mongering here. I think if it's something that you suspect about your kid or somebody that you love, it's worth a conversation, and it's worth thinking about like what kinds of resources are available to our family. And I just want to like validate anybody's experience who's out there, you know, you know, dealing with this because
Hmm.
it must be really scary. Okay, well, with that, if you appreciate this episode or any of our episodes, please leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps us out. And we'll see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.